Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. And in this special episode, we are looking at a number of issues that continue to be important both in Delhi and Washington, but there are different interpretations both in the US and in India, how this special relationship can be taken forward. And we have two experts with us who understand the subject better than perhaps almost all of us. We have Dr. Manoj Joshi, eminent political commentator, historian, former editor of a broadsheet, now with ORF, and the author most recently on a very good book on China. And we have with us Ms. Lisa Curtis, who is the director of the program at the Indo-American Security Center as a senior fellow and the director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at that institution. She's been a long-standing watcher of events in the subcontinent and is an expert on a number of issues related with security and the challenges they provide both to the US and India. So I'll start with you, Ms. Lisa Curtis. Now, there is a comment which was as good as Indians could expect from a US president, and in which President Biden told Prime Minister Modi during a bilateral meeting at a Quad summit held in Japan in May, but it applies now also. And he said, there is so much that our countries can and will do together. I'm committed to make the US-India partnership more closest amongst those we have on earth, and words to that effect. Now, how is Mr. Biden's stand very different from that of his predecessors? Because every American president in recent times, at least maybe in the last 2 decades, have all worked towards making Indo-US relationships close. How much closer can Biden and his administration take?
Well, thank you. I think the one thing that we know about the US-India relationship over the last 20 years is that it really does have bipartisan support in the United States. So we've only seen this relationship grow stronger over the last 20 years, whether it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration. I was in the Trump administration, and I think, during the Trump administration, the US-India relationship really was elevated. The defense and security partnership was related. India was given access to technologies like, armed UAVs. India's status was raised to Strategic Trade Authorization 1 status, giving India access to dual-use technology. You had a very good visit by President Trump to India in February 2020, where there was a comprehensive joint statement issued demonstrating cooperation across all areas. And I think that relationship between the US and India has only strengthened post-2020, that is post the COVID crisis, following the 2020 India.
Many observers in the US, but Dr. Joshi, at a recent gathering hosted by the Indian ambassador in Washington, some 600 odd eminences were invited there, and people of all types were there to represent India's multicultural heritage. But also what was important there was messaging that came out in terms of a visit to that gathering by the US Principal Deputy National Security Advisor, Jon Feiner, who applauded Mr. Modi's efforts to seek a consensus in the G20 summit. And apparently, we are being given to understand that that was really the turning point in formulating a statement of the G20. Is that credit correctly due, or is it too much credit being given to India and not to all the other big players who were there?
Well, Maroof, let me first say that when you introduced Lisa, you said she was from the CNAS, but actually, as far as I'm concerned, she was the senior most officer dealing with India in the National Security Council till 2021. And
Okay.
this gentleman that you just mentioned, I suspect that she was the predecessor officer. So she has a long innings as an official in the CIA, State Department, and in the National Security Council. And the last round, she was actually dealing directly with India and South Asia. Now, the point that you're making about the G20, you see, let me be very frank. We are the head of G20 on a rotational basis. Okay.
Right.
So this rotates, meaning it is our turn. We've taken up G20. And I think that from whatever I can see and read, that we are tending to make a bit too much of it. Now, certainly, it's a huge opportunity for India. We are a country which has, what should I say, a great nation aspirations rather than great power aspirations. And I think as the head of G20, from whatever messaging that is coming from the Prime Minister and the senior officials, is that India wants to take up that streak, meaning that particular stream in which we can do something, meaning the origin of G20. The origin of G20 is that when the G7 failed to cope with the global financial crisis in 2007, 2008, the G20 was created. So we're really talking, we're in an era where globalization is coming apart. And globalization and trade, let me be very frank, is something which enriches the world. And we need to do something about it. We need to do something about it. And I think this is India's historic opportunity. And that is where we should move. And if we get the support of the United States, I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I agree with all the points you've made. In fact, to put it a little more bluntly, I think we shouldn't be too self-congratulatory about what we can do. I think the bottom line is we can do as much as our friends allow us to do. And among the friends, of course, we have to count the United States, who've been repeatedly asserting its desire for greater engagement with India. And I go back to Lisa to say that 2022 was a year that was very good and critical for Indo-US relations. And 2023, apparently, even a columnist from the US who writes for us regularly has said they expect 2023 to be even bigger. How much bigger and in what areas?
Well, I think 2023, India is going to be focused on its role as leader of the G20. So that's going to be a major focus for India. And of course, as Manoj just mentioned, the US is very supportive of India's leadership role in the G20 and will do whatever it can to support India in the goals that it's seeking to achieve, whether it's on the economic front or climate change, or, food security, so many of the global challenges that are being faced right now. So I do think that will be a major focus of India's, and it will be a major focus of US-India engagement. But we've also have a Quad summit coming up. The Australians are hosting a Quad summit in the spring. So the Quad agenda will continue to move forward. And that has been extremely robust in the last, 5 years since it was revived. It was revived in 2017 when I was at the National Security Council. It, of course, has been gaining more and more momentum under the Biden administration. And so that will remain a key focus of the US-India bilateral relationship. So I think it's through these other groupings and the US supporting India as, a leader on these critical issues will characterize the 2023 agenda of US-India relations.
So that's very well put. We'll come back after a break. We are doing well with time to ask you some more questions about some of the issues that need to be addressed more squarely, but that after a break. Welcome back. We are continuing to have our two experts on Indo-US relations. And we are looking at several issues that enjoy both support in New Delhi and in Washington. But there are some areas that are irritants for Delhi also. So I'll ask you, Dr. Joshi, one of the areas that New Delhi is very sensitive about is indications from the US, and sometimes even, as I read somewhere, by a deputy spokesman in Washington who turned around and raised some broadsides on India's record with regard to the freedom of minorities and issues related with that. Now, Indians are obviously very sensitive about it. Uh, do the US officials realize that by bringing this up, they could be undoing a lot of good work that's happening in other areas? Or is it par for the course for the US to bring this up as part of their promises to the people who elect them, that they will not ignore these issues, whether it is with a friend or a foe?
Well, I think, the US would not be the US if it didn't raise these issues. The US has a certain understanding of democracy, certain understanding of human rights. And frankly, if the Indians are sensitive about it, they should do something about it. It is a fact, meaning anyone who lives in this country knows that there are issues with the minorities. And if the US is pointing this out, I think we should be grateful for it. It's not just the United States, others are also pointing it out. And it requires a certain amount of humility. It will improve the quality of our democracy. And likewise, of course, we are free to criticize the United States, for its lapses. But I definitely think among democratic countries, this kind of understanding, the primacy of democracy, I think should never be let go. We should never let it go, because then what's the point? Where is the relationship? Meaning, we often talk about the world's largest democracies, et cetera, et cetera. Democracy is the heart of our relationship. And if such questions are not raised, then we'll be, what should I say? Then it will be like an authoritarian country and the United States, where it's a kind of a transactional process, where it's not really based on genuine friendship and care for each other.
Okay, so understood. Your point is made forcefully, and it has gone home well with me, and I'm sure with many others. Ms. Lisa Curtis, now, how would you explain the matter of America continuing to engage with Pakistan and seeing Pakistan as crucial to America's Southern Asian agenda, whether to reach out to Afghanistan or to invent a new narrative or to support Pakistan with fund allocation for the upgradations of their F-16s, all of which many of us know are not to fight terrorists, but basically as a counter to India's footprint in the region.
Well, look, I think the US-Pakistan relationship will never be as robust as it was in the past. I think that's clear. The US is well aware that the Taliban would not have been able to come back to power in Afghanistan without their sanctuary in Pakistan. So despite the US cutting military assistance to Pakistan, they continue to support the Taliban, and that's well known in the United States. But I think at the same time, it would not be in the US interest to completely ignore Pakistan. In other words, I think the US and Pakistan need to have, somewhat of a cordial relationship. The US, of course, supported Pakistan in its time of need when it faced the, biblical level flooding that we saw in the spring. The US is, supportive of an IMF package for Pakistan to help with its economic problems. And Pakistan, for its part, doesn't want to be completely reliant on China. And by the way, the US and India both would not benefit from a situation where, Pakistan's only friends are maybe China, Saudi Arabia. So I think it behooves India's interest for the US to have, some kind of relationship with Pakistan, some kind of, influence and communication with Pakistan. Now, of course, you raised the issue of the F-16 package, which again, I would point to when I was at the NSC, President Trump cut military assistance to Pakistan because of their ongoing support to the Taliban. I don't know what is behind the Biden administration's decision to resume the FMF, foreign military financing for the upgrades for the F-16s. But I would, guess that they may be trying to, continue the relationship to some degree. And, I've read some reports that perhaps Pakistan has been helpful to the Ukrainians, providing ammunition, helping to get ammunition to the Ukrainians. And that's been a huge need for the Ukrainians in their fight against the Russians. So, again, I wouldn't see the resumption of, the FMF to Pakistan. I wouldn't read too much into that. It's not as if the US will ever go back to the kind of large-scale military assistance it provided in the early 2000s. But it may signal that the US is trying to normalize the relationship to some degree. But, the US-India relationship will always be the most critical relationship for the United States.
Yeah, actually, it's little aberrations like that which get more space in the media than the positives. Also, it's been seen in India as a kind of reaction in the US to India's insistence on engaging with Russia, even after repeated US. Now, many insiders that I speak to, they basically say that the US-India relationship is all about exploiting the opportunities in the Indian market to sell US technology and weapons, and not so much as standing in with India against China. Your views?
Well, the thing is that the US in the 2017 National Security Strategy and in the Biden National Security Strategy, I think it's now very clear that the US sees China as its primary strategic competitor. Now, in this competition, and this competition has a military edge as well, in this competition, India is the only country in the entire Indo-Pacific that has the heft to make US policy viable. In the sense, if you look at Japan, if you look at Australia, Australia is nothing, you see. So the thing is that the United States recognizes the value of India. And I don't think that the United States wants India to be a kind of a military ally like Japan or Australia is. What the United States wants is that a democratic, free India continues to grow and continues to grow faster. And if it grows by itself, it'll offset the attraction that China has.
Okay.
So I think the US has a very sophisticated understanding of India, and I don't think that they are looking at India that you come with us gung ho, to fight the Chinese. It's a more sophisticated policy, and it's based on encouraging India's technology, encouraging India to grow, so that by itself India offsets the Chinese attraction.
Yeah, to build on that. Yeah, I think the US wants India to have the capabilities to deal with a rising China. It's in the US interest that India can, stand up to China or defend itself. So I think that Manoj is very correct in saying that there's no sort of desire just to sell US wares to India. No, there's a strategic interest in seeing India be able to, protect itself, defend itself, to be a leading power in the Indo-Pacific. That is in the fundamental U.S. interest.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you. With those positive sentiments expressed and the last words, we'll have to come to an end. Thank you very much for your contributions, and thanks to everybody for watching.